John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. Last week, I took a helicopter tour of SRP's 7 lakes and dams that provide more than half of the valley's water. We are in good shape, by the way, despite a dry monsoon last summer and a fairly dry winter. We are at 62% capacity in SRP's reservoirs. We're going to talk about this and the water situation, not only here but across the state. Leslie Meyers, Associate General Manager and Chief Water Resources Executive at SRP. Great to see you, Leslie.
It's good to see you too, John.
That was a heck of a tour, I got to tell you. I was so impressed, I have to say that, just looking at the planning that went into this going back over 100 years. We are really in a fortunate place in this state, and you'd hardly know it when the East Coast press gets out here and says we're going to dry up and blow away. That is hardly the case.
You're right, that is hardly the case. The farmers in the Salt River Valley over 100 years ago had the foresight to work with the Bureau of Reclamation, develop this system of storage throughout the Salt River project so that we could weather the highs and the lows just exactly how we have been doing for the last 100 years.
And on the tour, I believe that Jacob Richardson, who's the hydrologist who went up with us, he said that we are kind of in an average year, or in an average situation right now, which he says you only hit 5 years out of 45 years that you actually hit average. He said that's kind of where we are right now, and it's a rarity.
It is actually. If you look at our average inflow into our reservoir system, most years are well below average, and a couple years are well above average. We almost never end up right in that middle section. It's part of living in the West and learning how to compromise with the weather.
Yeah, that's the thing. So it's kind of feast or famine. So we've got to really capitalize on grabbing that water when we have it and banking it. So 22 and 23 were good years. 23 was one of the best we've ever had. So that gave us a buffer for what we're going through right now, which is a little bit of a dry stretch, and that could go on a while.
It could. Of course, we hope that it doesn't. But you're right, 23 was a banner year. In fact, we had to release record amounts of water from our system because we had so much inflow in that year. And then 24 was a pretty good year, too. This year has not been great. As folks that live in Arizona know, we haven't had a lot of rainfall or snowfall since the fall of last year. But our storage capability, both above ground and underground, allows us to work our way through it.
Before we get to underground, because I want to get into that, the groundwater storage is a huge component of what we do. But I want to focus right now on the 2 rivers that feed this system. We'll start with the Verde to the west, and then we'll work over to the Salt to the east. Let's start with the Verde. Let's start at the top of the system of the Verde, Horseshoe Lake. That really feeds us. Horseshoe and Bartlett on the Verde, they feed us generally in the winter months, right?
We do, actually. We move back over in the winter months. We have the capability to switch deliveries back and forth. Our goal really is with the Verde, it's the storage on the Verde side is very small in comparison to the storage on the Salt side. It's only about 1/10 the size or the capacity. And so in advance of the winter, we try to draw down those Verde reservoirs, and then in advance of summer monsoon season, we do the same. And we do that so we have space in those reservoirs at times when we have more likelihood of getting water and developing water on the system. So we draw them down and fill them up.
Okay, so Horseshoe, I think, was at 60% when we were there. Could be a little less now. And you can see kind of the bathtub ring when you're up there. You can see, it's been drawn down a little bit. So you're drawing down there on the Verde system, which again is Horseshoe and then Bartlett South.
Yes.
You draw those down during the winter months and the fall, and then in the spring and summer, you kind of switch over to the Salt more, right?
We do. We do. And so then, because that's where we have most of our storage capacity on the salt. So we're much more worried about keeping space available on the Verde side in case we have good rainfall or flood events than we are on the salt side. On the salt side, we have the capability of dealing with flood control and with other operational issues much easier.
Okay, let's go south to Bartlett. Bartlett's really an interesting story because it's about 50% full right now. But Bartlett, you guys are talking about raising the dam by about, I think, 100 feet. Is that right?
That's right.
That would triple the storage in Bartlett.
It would, and the reason why we're looking at increasing the size of Bartlett, and we've because our problem really is that we've lost a lot of capacity on the Verde side. So the fact that we have significantly less capacity, but then we have a lot of sedimentation on the Verde side, which means that when the rains come and the water comes down in the Verde River, it brings with it a lot of sediments. It stops at Horseshoe Dam and it settles out. And we've lost about half of the capacity in the Horseshoe Reservoir over time. So we're worried about that because it's such a small, there's so little capacity there anyway, that we've been working with local partners, with the federal government, with non-governmental organizations, environmental groups, looking at how do we recover that capacity. We did an appraisal level study a couple years ago, and we have congressional authorization to do a feasibility study, which is where we are now.
I mean, that would be kind of a game changer for the valley and its water security, raising that dam by 100 feet. Who's opposed to it?
Well, so far we've tried really hard to include everyone in these studies so that we can get everyone's perspective. And we've had a lot of support because people understand what the problem is. They understand the process that we've gone through. And really the whole purpose of doing these studies is to bring in all these diverse interests and seek consensus on a pathway forward, right? We've identified the problem. We agree there's a problem. We've identified solutions. We agree that there's at least one solution. So I wouldn't want to say that everyone supports it 100%, but everyone has had a chance to voice their concerns. We're just getting ready to kick off a NEPA process. So we're going to do an EIS, and that is very specifically a public involvement process. So we're planning to get a lot more input through that process.
Is there much environmentalist pushback on this?
We haven't had, like I said, we've had some environmental groups involved, and they've been supportive because they got to be a part of the development of a solution.
That is
so
great
we'll
news.
See, right? We'll see through the NEPA process if there's any perspectives that we're missing.
Would Bartlett be significantly larger? I mean, if you raise that dam 100 feet, you'd think that the lake then will spread out a little further. Would it be a big change? Would it be a much larger lake?
It would be a much larger lake, and primarily what it'll do is it will back up farther in the river channel. So it will go almost all the way when it's full, and it won't be full very often, but it will be full. And we talked about that we have these really big years that in 1 year we could fill up the system, but it would back it up almost to the base of Horseshoe Dam. So yes, the overall area would be larger, and the impact between the two reservoirs, which water has been flowing in for almost 100 years.
Let's just take, before we go to the break, let's take us onto the salt system. So we swing east across the valley, across the Mazatzal wilderness area, and we end up at Roosevelt Lake, which by and large, that is the largest body of water we've got in your system, overwhelmingly.
It is our flagship reservoir.
Okay, so that one accounts for how much of our water storage? It's got to be a huge percentage.
It's we can store for conservation storage about 1.6 million acre feet of water in Roosevelt Dam, and our overall storage is 2.2 million acre feet. So,
It's half.
3/4, yes.
Yeah, over
of the
half.
available storage on the system.
Okay, so on the salt, describe the differences between the salt system to the east and the Verde system to the west. Why is the salt so much more bountiful?
Actually, the Salt River, the watershed that produces water, is roughly the same size. It's a little bit bigger on the salt side, but it just has the ability to produce more water supply. And that's because we get more snow that accumulates throughout the winter months, and it runs off. We just have the more ability to get that water into the reservoirs than we do on the Verde side.
Is Roosevelt primarily, it's primarily water storage, but it is also some flood control, right?
It is. It is. And originally, we didn't have flood control capability in Roosevelt when it was originally designed and built. And if you think about that, we weren't too worried about the risks downstream in the early 1900s. But as the valley grew, primarily because the availability of water from the Salt River project, we grew the 5th largest city in the country. We did that with when we added Central Arizona Project water and other access to water so we could continue to grow. So actually, when the Central Arizona Project was authorized, there was an analysis done, and during that same period of time, Roosevelt Dam was raised for safety of dams purposes and to add flood control space. So since the early 90s, we've had the ability to control flooding on the Salt River side.
So you did to Roosevelt what you hoped to do to Bartlett on the Verde.
Similar,
Raise the dam.
We added capacity, yes. A significant amount of capacity, actually, at Roosevelt.
Leslie Meyers is Associate General Manager and Chief Water Resources Executive at SRP. When we come back, we're going to talk about the remainder on the salt of our tour: Apache Lake, Horse Mesa Dam, Mormon Flat Dam, Saguaro Lake, Stewart Mountain Dam, and we'll end at Granite Reef. Back with Leslie Meyers, SRP, in a moment. Back with Leslie Meyers, Associate General Manager, Chief Water Resources Executive at SRP, talking about water, the water situation in the valley. Let's just start with kind of the oh my God moment that we are using less water in Arizona than we did in 1957, and we've added 6 million people. Tell me how that is possible.
It's possible because, you know, what happened in the 50s is we had the ability to develop more water. Cotton prices were up, we could drill bigger wells, we had cheaper electricity, and our water use really grew based on agriculture. And over the years, as we looked at importing supplies, we realized we really needed to get a handle on that groundwater use. And in 1980, we passed the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, which had restrictions on how we could use groundwater. It developed the Arizona Department of Water Resources. We had best management practices for conservation efforts. So lots of things happened. We really grabbed on tight. And from that time on, we started reducing our water use while we were increasing our capabilities. So actually today, we use about the same amount of volume of water in central Arizona, even though the population has grown 5 times and our gross domestic income 2,000 times during that period. So we've really become, Arizona has really set itself aside as water conservation, water use experts.
And we have traded agriculture land, which uses a lot of water just per acre. It just does, versus a residential neighborhood. So as you've traded ag land for urban land, the water usage actually goes down.
It does. It goes down significantly, especially depending on what we were growing on those lands. You know, we could use as much as 7 feet of water per acre for agriculture, and we might use 1 foot per acre for housing.
So it's a 7-to-1 ratio. 7-to-1 ratio? Wow.
It could be.
Okay, so let's continue our tour that we took last week along. Now we're on the Salt River system. We go to Apache Lake, which is, that I think is the prettiest real estate. I know you guys don't own it. You just manage the dams and all of that. But that is stunning scenery. By the way, dotted with dwellings from probably 700, 800 years ago.
Yes. You got the expert tour then if you got to see the ruins while you were there. But yes, it really is. The Salt River Canyon is a very special place.
Now that is, again, that's still, you're dealing with storage there, but you're also getting hydroelectric power.
We are. And after we developed the original dams, we realized that we identified that water energy nexus. We need energy to move water. We need water to develop energy. And we added, actually on the salt system, a pump back storage system. So we actually keep those lower 3 reservoirs pretty full so that we can release water at times and generate electricity at times when we need electricity. And when we have surplus energy, we can pump the water back. So it's really a closed system there where we can use water essentially as our fuel source and develop really good, clean hydroelectric power.
On the Verde, there is no hydropower, right? In those two, in Horseshoe and Bartlett, simply water storage. But on the Salt, you've got it, I think, out of 4 out of 6 dams, right? Or 4 out of 5?
We have all of the dams on the salt side have the capability of generating power.
Okay, as we move down, we hit Horse Mesa Dam, then on to Mormon Flat, which is Canyon Lake. Then we go down to Saguaro and Stewart Mountain Dam, which is a marvel.
Yes.
That thing's a beast.
It is. And you can see that, that's a really important dam in our system because that's where we regulate releases into the river and essentially into the canal system. So even in high water years, we're making some big releases through Stewart Mountain Dam and potentially even over Granite Reef Dam.
I've been talking to some of the weather people who just got into town and trying to explain that we have had unbelievable floods in this town. Late 70s, early 80s, early 90s. We have some history of flooding here, and it's hard to believe or imagine if you haven't seen it, which I've been around long enough, I've seen it.
I have too. And I remember when our low water crossings across the Salt River would close down and folks actually couldn't get from north to south because of flooding in the Salt River.
Right, right. So again, you're dealing with trying to store water, but then if you get a huge winter and you've happened to store a lot of water before that, you've got to do releases. There's no other choice.
That's true today. Now, we do have opportunities on the salts at Roosevelt Dam to store water. We recently, just almost a year ago now, got approval from the Corps of Engineers to modify our flood operating criteria so that we can hold water from it. Today, we have to release water from that flood control space in Roosevelt in 20 days. We got approval to hold it for 120 days.
Right.
So that's going to help us significantly with, we'll still have water in the river. We just won't have to let it all go in a 20-day period.
Let's go to the end point, Leslie. This is Granite Reef Diversion Dam. This is a really interesting, it's the confluence of the Verde and the Salt, plus you have CAP Canal running through there. Help me with this. How much of our water in the valley is SRP versus CAP water?
I can tell you in central Arizona, so we historically we had diverted about 1.5 million acre-feet of water from the Colorado River through the CAP and delivered it into Phoenix and down to Tucson. This last year, because of reductions to Colorado River water and in the CAP, it's probably closer to 700,000 acre-feet of water was delivered through CAP to Phoenix, Pinal County, and Tucson. But today, we're about even. Generally, it's maybe 1/3, 2/3 in normal years on the Colorado River.
2/3 SRP, 1/3 Colorado.
In a normal year, it would be 2/3 Colorado River water.
Okay.
In central Arizona.
In central Arizona.
And that means through the CAP and 1/3 through SRP. But the beauty of SRP is that because of our system, which we talked about before, and our consistency in our storage, we're very consistent in our deliveries from year to year.
And you're able to bank it. This is a remarkable thing. So when somebody tells you, or you read it in the press, that Arizona has a water crisis, I mean, I have a different term for it. I think we're in a persistent water challenge, but we are not in a crisis. Not by any stretch. I don't see it.
I agree with you on that. And I think that Arizona has done an incredible job of developing water supplies, making them reliable and resilient, and using every tool in our toolbox to be good water managers.
Well, it's a good thing you are. At Granite Reef Dam, that picture is just stunning because everything just ends and the dry salt begins. So at that point, you have diverted the water into the canals, the labyrinth of canals for Salt River Project, and that's going out all over. And at that point, but you're banking water underground. And as I understand it, that's 1 million acre-feet that we're banking in the ground, letting it percolate down through the aquifer, and it's really good water when you get down there.
It is. And yes, in the early 90s, we developed what we call GRUS, the Granite Reef Underground Storage Project. It's right in the Salt River bed. And we have the ability to apply water, which is, it joins back into the aquifer system just through gravity. And we acquire long-term storage credits, the owners of that water, and they have the ability then to recover that water at a later time. So now we have above ground storage and underground storage, and we've just increased our capacity and our ability to store for the future. We have a term that we call firming, which means that water will be there later when we need it. And the beauty of the underground system is we're not losing water to evaporation, and we're not necessarily limited to this specific reservoir system. There's actually storage sites all over central Arizona.
Is the groundwater kind of the break glass in case of emergency? Is that kind of our ultimate thing that props it all up if we really continue on in a drought situation?
That's really how it was designed. This whole concept of underground storage really came about with the thought that we weren't sure when we were going to need the water, but we would take it when we had it, either off of the Salt River system, off of the Colorado River system, and in some cases even effluent, which is treated wastewater, and we would store it for later.
And the next frontier seems to be this reuse of water, because water never really goes away. When it goes down your drain, it's recovered at some point, and all the water we have is on Earth right now, and it's all we'll ever have. But it keeps regenerating. So as long as we're smart about it, we should be in pretty good shape.
Maybe where the water used to fall, it doesn't anymore, or we may get wetter, wet cycles in the Northeast and drier, dry cycles in the Southwest, but we have the ability to mitigate that through all these things that we've been talking about today.
Leslie Meyers, Associate General Manager and Chief Water Resources Executive at SRP. Really appreciate it. Thanks to your crew for the tour. It was highly educational and put my mind at ease, actually, about where we are water-wise.
Great. Thanks, John. You know, the best day is the day out on the watershed.
You too. You take care, and great to see you, Leslie. I appreciate your time. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker. Thanks again to Leslie Meyers, the Associate General Manager, Chief Water Resources Executive at SRP. Really enjoyed it. We will see you next week on Newsmaker.